Yeah, we're live. We are live. 7:42. Just got back taking dogs for a walk. We wanted to get them out and get them walking around. Always better when they're out walking around. We like taking them for the long hikes up the hills and stuff, and that way, quite honestly, it tires them out, so they sleep at night and don't want to get up at three o'clock in the morning or a bunch more times. But today we are talking about not just big block Chevys, although we are talking about this big block Chevy intake manifold. So this was a converted single plane. I don't remember what this was, a Wyand or a Victor Junior's, like a 454R or something like that. But you can see from the photo, and I'll show that here. So you guys will all see what I'm talking about if you can't see the thumbnail. This right here. It's got an ACCUFAB 4154 hole throttle body. That's like 1,000, excuse me, like 1,000 CFM throttle body. We have injectors. We have injector bungs, welded, machined into there, and they have a fuel rail and stuff. Feeding. Those are, I think those are 36-pound injectors. So the question is, we went to a lot of trouble. This was back before when they had. I think this was done back before they actually had these. Back before they had EFI converted single planes already, readily made. And so the question is that necessary? I mean, we went through a lot of work to convert it, to weld it and machine it and get it all ready and get fuel rails done and all that stuff. And obviously got a 4150 throttle body. Is that worth it? Does that setup make, does it make more power than a carburetor? Yeah. The answer to that we already know is no, it does not do that. The reason for that primarily is because it doesn't have charge cooling associated with, the fuel cools the air going in on a carburetor. And so you make a little bit more power with the carburetor. There are other things, obviously, to consider when we're talking about this. One, you can tune this better, obviously, with port injection. So if you needed to, you can... And we probably would on this particular. We didn't test this, but I've tested on other single plane manifolds. The distribution is not great on a single plane manifold, on any of them. Not that I know of, not right out of the box. At the very least, they're gonna require different fuel flow at different engine speeds in different ports. So, if you have the same going to all of them, it's just not gonna. The distribution is not going to be good. The air fuel is going to be different, and that's going to change as we go up through engine speeds. As the shorter runners become more efficient and the longer runs become less efficient, that's going to change. So there's definitely some issues there with putting fuel injection on it. The nice thing about this is if you're using sequential injection, you can go and individually tune all the cylinders. So you can make at every RPM and every load and all that stuff, you can make the air fuel be what you want. Can't do this with a carburetor. I know the carburetor guys want to tell me that, I can tune everything's going to be exactly what you want. It's not going to be, because you don't have individual cylinder tuning the way that you do on port fuel injection. Port fuel injection is just better that way. The other thing that quite possibly could make port fuel injection in this instance better is that we have 1,000 CFM 4150 throttle body that doesn't have anything in the way of flowing air. So that throttle body flows more than most carburetors, even most 1,000 CFM, at least 4150 carburetors and 950s and 850s and 750s. That throttle body probably outflows them. So theoretically, it could support more power just owing to its airflow potential. That only, comes into play. It doesn't come into play on a 400 horsepower big block because you have more than enough to do that. In fact, you have more than enough for a long way up until the airflow becomes a restriction. And then that's when more airflow, something that could provide more airflow, could potentially make more power. But it still has the injectors down at the base, and that's not ideal for power production. So what that does is allow us to continue to argue about, or some people to continue to argue about, which one's better. You get fuel injection guys that are looking back at people that ran carburetors as dinosaurs and stuff. But the reality is, again, if you test them on the same manifold, it's going to be really hard for a fuel injection guy to beat a carbureted guy because a carburetor just makes more power. It took a long time for the pro stock guys to make as much power with their fuel injection as they were with their carburation. Same thing with NASCAR when they switched over. You know, you eventually can. They eventually did it, but when they switched over to fuel injection, they were making less power for a while until they got it better. So, you know, from just a power standpoint, carburetor works very well. The other thing I like about a carburetor is we always laugh at West Tech, and I'm talking to Brule about this, is that we liken it to a mechanical macerometer. Because when you put it on, if we take one out of the box, you know, we take one out of the cabinet or even out of the box and put it on a motor. If we put it on a small motor, it works. Put it on a medium-sized motor, it works. Put it on a big motor, it works. Now, to absolutely get the most out of it, you know, we might have to play around with tuning, jetting, or whatever. But the thing is, they work pretty well. Unless something is wrong, something is one of the passages are plugged in the metering valve, you know, a power valve is broke or whatever. If it's some sort of mechanical defect, then that can make the thing not work. But I've shown before that even if the motor wanted 70 jets and we ran it on 100 jets, it still started up and ran and worked. I mean, it will still work. And so you can be pretty far off on a lot of those things as long as, like I said, as long as there's not a squirter problem or a power valve problem or something we're going to blame the carburetor. If there's a vacuum leak, if there's a distributor problem or something else, if there's a bad valve spring, if there's a rocker that's loose or something, you know, we always blame it on the tune. And that goes with fuel injection as well. You have a mechanical problem and you're asking your tuner to tune around that. They can't do that. You can't tune around something that's like mechanically wrong, but the tuner gets blamed for that kind of stuff all the time. Same thing with carburetors. Oh, those carburetors are junk. You had 2 rockers that weren't on your motor. It had nothing to do with the carburetor. The carburetor's fine. And in fact, more often than not, we put carburetors on and they work. And so I'm actually a big fan. But when you have these, invariably you have the 2 camps. Oh, carbureted guys and fuel injecting guys, and they bicker back and forth. I'm like, that's ridiculous. They both do what they do, like things that we just went over. Carburetors have charge cooling that make power. Fuel injection has the tunability, doesn't make quite as much power because it doesn't have the charge cooling unless you position injectors up high in the manifold. You know, they all have things to talk about. But in none of them do you, unless it's for a specific application, do you have one that's like head and shoulders above better than the other one. I mean, all the OEMs have gone to fuel injection because what they're doing, what they're asking of it is they can make it do better than they can with a carburetor, although they got pretty good with carburetors. But for, cruise, fuel economy, emissions, and all that stuff, fuel injection is the way to go. But from the average guy driving around, he can't go tune his fuel injection, especially if he changed anything. He can't tune his fuel injection more than likely the way that an OEM can. I mean, not very many people out there in the world can tune it the way that the OEM can because they don't have the time and money and resources to make it work at the level that the OEMs do. I know that all the tuners will tell them, oh, I'm better than the factory guys. You don't have what they have. Maybe not in intelligence or experience, but certainly not in the amount of time and money and all of the things that they have, all of the computers and the test cells and all that stuff that they have. You don't have that. And so that's why when you get in a brand new car, it does all of the things that it's supposed to do. They work really well. But on our 4-hole throttle body big block Chevy, which one would you rather have? And for me, it doesn't come down to either one of those things that we talked about. It does a little bit. The carburation works really well. And if I had a big block and I had a Chevelle, I'd probably put a carburetor on it. If I was putting forced induction on it, I probably would put fuel injection on it. I know, and shout out to Kevin at CSU. We've used this carburetor many, many times, and it's always worked really well. It's pretty easy to get things to work at wide open throttle like I do, and to get it tuned right, and it does that. But if it was something I was driving around and I had a blower or turbo or something like that, I just don't think that I would do that. I don't think that I would go with a blow through carbureted application as a daily driver. And I don't think I would do it with a manifold where I was concerned about fuel distribution anyways. I think that that's an easy way to hurt a motor, not because of carburetors, because the problem is probably not with the carburetor. The carburetor can supply a consistent amount of fuel. That it goes to the intake manifold consistently, that's another story. But with individual cylinder tuning and fuel injection, we can overcome some of those problems that are associated with the intake manifold design that a carburetor won't do. You can do it a little bit, maybe with corner jetting and things, but it's a lot harder. And so if I was doing fuel injection and I had that kind of problematic intake manifold, I mean, if I was doing forced induction turbo, supercharger, like a centrifugal blower or whatever, I think that I would do it with fuel injection. The exception is like a 671 or an 871. I'd put carburetors on it, and then probably E85 carburetors, because those would be great. But lots of charge cooling with the carburetors, and you don't have the same kind of distribution problems that you do with other types of manifolds. They work really well, and the carburetors have a dramatic charge cooling effect on those blowers. We've seen that they drop temperature a lot, which is really good. And I probably would have that, and not 4-hole throttle bodies, not injectors on top, or definitely not injectors on the bottom. As we've seen, they do need lubrication going through them. So the fuel helps do that as well on some of those blowers. But let's see what you guys got going on for today. Would you run EFI on your big block? I'm going to put street strip big block. Let's see what we got going on. How hard is it to rebuild an LT1? Which LT1 are you talking about? 1970, 1990, what? 5 or 6 or something like that, and then or a new generation of 2019. Should fit under a Trans Am hood scoop. Richard, I want to see some test data on an Excel Super Ram for a big block Chevy, the Tunnel Ram EFI version. So send me over a photo of what you're talking about. Richard, what is it we do? Ridiculous cross ram that has 30 inches long runners but are huge in diameter to get both ends of the RPM band. You won't do that. We can try that, but as you change runner length, regardless of the diameter, the reflected wave still has to travel a certain distance over a certain amount of time. So the reflected wave is still going to happen regardless of the diameter. Admiral wants help on how to wire and set up a factory front ABS sensor on my Mustang into a Holly for a front speed sensor for traction control. Does anybody, Dan wants to know if airplanes, small private piston engine airplanes, are they using EFI now? LT1 oil blowing out a dipstick. So did you break a ring or something? That's kind of what it sounds like. Airplanes have used EFI for a while now. A big benefit to being able to deal with non-level flight. Yeah, that makes sense. An Edelbrock AVS 750 on my Mopar. That nitrous backfire bent the secondary butterflies. Go lean. Put on a 625 AVS2 and had a bad bog, but I got home. Richard, is that Eurobeat music in your video intros, Benny? I don't know whose it is. I got it from Video Shop, but I've had some copyright claims on it, so I've stopped using it. Jason, thank you very much. I didn't wet flow any dominators. Blowing head gasket, putting pressure into the crankcase. One of the best ideas on EFI was a guy had 2 sets of injectors and a tank of regular gas and a tank of race gas. He could advance timing and power with the race gas. More power. You need to take your LT1 apart and see how bad it is. It might just be a bad head gasket. Really want to see some big block Chevy Excel Super Rams. Do they even sell those anymore? Let's see. Like to run a Super 700-inch big block. Yeah, we talked about Supers last night. That's cool stuff. See this happen sometimes. Someone will spend $1,000 on fuel injection because he didn't want to spend $800 on a nice carb. It ends up running worse. Yeah, I think a lot of guys were talking into putting those 4-hole throttle bodies in place of carburetors when they probably could have just, rebuilt their carburetor or tuned their carburetor. What reliability can you expect from an ACCUFAB? A 4-hole throttle body should last forever. Great twin screw video, Richard. Was hoping to see those different size boost leaks in that test. That was years and years and years ago. Yeah, guys do the dual fuel system all the time. They also have a dual fuel system that they run on their nitrous setup. They just have the good gas on their nitrous. Kevin, better MPG out of an EFI 351 over my carb. That's another area, and that's what we talked about with the OEMs going there. Definitely, I think better fuel mileage potential with fuel injection. Why didn't somebody come up with vacuum secondary throttle body? The puny primaries, big secondaries. The GM, that Lotus LT5 motor in the ZR1, the original one, that had that. It had a very, very small primary to drive on and then 2 bigger secondaries. you had the opportunity to build an SVT Cobra, would you do a 5-liter push rod or build the 4.6 modular? Don't. If the motor already has a modular in it, I would probably just modify the one that's already in there rather than try to do a motor swap on it. Can you stop pinging and knock with EFI? It depends on what's causing it. If it's a problem is lean mixture, then yeah, you can. Richard, is it possible to get the max horsepower under 6,500 versus a can that makes max horsepower at 7,500, let's say? I don't know. Was there another part of your question it seems like I'm missing? It's possible to make power at 6,500 or less. But I'm sure there's more to your question. Just a different camshaft does that. Well, really a different engine combination does that. Do you think a Holley Super Sniper EFI can survive a nitrous backfire better than a carburetor? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how thick the blades are and how they're secured and all that. Have you tried the Edelbrock VRS 4150 yet? I think we've run one. I think I ran one on a motor, but I haven't compared it to anything. Brule's done a bunch of stuff with it. He likes them a lot. SVT van. I'm looking to do an SM95. On that car, I don't think I would pick a 5-liter or a 4.6. I think I would pick a 351. For sure, we want to see a 9,000 RPM big block. I don't build motors like that. That's just way too much money. There are guys that have run stuff like that probably at West Tech, but I'm not going to do that. The number of people that would, the market for that is 1 or 2 people. Throttle body injection versus port injection. Throttle body injection doesn't have any cylinder-to-cylinder tuning available for it. So it would be the same as a carburetor. The only thing, the throttle body injection could have a benefit over a carburetor in that you could tune it a little bit better at every engine speed and stuff, but not individual cylinders. And the throttle body injection should, if it's working right and cooperates, which it doesn't always do that, and the throttle body injection flows enough, it should make more power than port injection. Why would a 6-liter, you can hear piston slap after it runs for hours, but it cools down and runs normal? I don't know why piston slap would be greater at temperature. I'll put one Holley's 450 Economasters. That's what I had on my Camaro back in the day. I haven't ever run a Predator carburetor. I don't ever remember seeing one even at West Tech. Trying to make 700 horsepower and 700 foot-pounds. 700 foot-pounds is going to be the hard part with that. It's 1.4 foot-pounds of torque per cubic inch. That's going to be a lot on pump gas. With a blower, wouldn't be that hard. But NA is going to be hard. Why do I have a heart on the bottom right of the corner? Does that mean you need to like it? How's our poll doing? 78% are saying yes, that you would run EFI in your big block. What happened to the carb that looked like a square box? That's the Predator that they're talking about, I think. My Ford engines have better oil pressure than Chevy engines. I don't think that that's actually true. What's the maximum RPM that still generates power for a 5.3? I don't really understand your question. There are 5.3s that run more than 8,000 RPM if you want to make power up there. You just have to put the right combination of components there. Yo, Chad Reynolds is in the house. Everybody say hey to Chad. How do I picture the big block Chevy Excel Super Ram? Can I get your email so you can send it? Yeah, a lot of the nitrous motors run burst plates on them, so that if you do have a backfire, that blows up. A lot of the Wilson stuff that we have burst plates on them. The Chad, did you guys ever run a Predator carburetor? I don't even remember seeing one. I don't remember what Brule ever even talking about one. I mean, we've talked about them, but I don't remember him running any at West Tech. Like to see some old motorbike style constant velocity carbs. Can you achieve lower idle RPM with sequential EFI, especially with hot cams? I don't know. I've never seen a competition like that. How much more horsepower would using an individual runner setup over a 4-barrel carburetor? The intake manifold design is going to dictate what kind of power you make. The IR stuff usually does better because it has optimum runner length in it. Richard just flow tested my 455 Buick heads. They flow 350 on the intake. Are those some kind of aftermarket aluminum head? 230 on the exhaust? Those should make good power then. Had a good friend who ran Predator on his 327 small block. Chad, I never ran a Predator. I saw them, but never actually ran one. I haven't ever either. Or saw one working where I could check it out. I know. I just want to see one work in operation. Tunnel ram, a twin annual discharge, throttle body injected carbs could be gorgeous. Best of both worlds. I don't know. What is the ideal runner length and cross section for a 6,500 RPM marine big block? I don't have an answer to that. It's going to be about what the length of a good big block Chevy tunnel ram. I wish you'd cater more to the boat guys. I don't know. All of the motor combinations that I run, all of those things can be applied to boats. They still cylinder heads, intake manifolds, camshafts, that all works with boats. High ram fuel injection intake, throttle body in the front or top or center. That's not going to change distribution at all because the manifold is still drawing air from the common plenum. The throttle opening is just feeding the common plenum. The thing that happens with those different lids, which I've tested, is on a high ram, on an LS particularly, but this would work on the other high rams, I would imagine, that the dual quad top for the high ram flows more than the single front throttle body opening. So that makes more power and then makes even more power if it has carburetors on it. Richard, what are my options viable for tuning a blow-through EFI? I don't know what fuel injection system you have. You have to get a tuner. The original Bigfoot. That's right. The Bigfoot had two Predators on it. Google, you're going to have a really hard time doing the comparison that you're talking about, because you're not going to be able to take your combination and have one cam make peak power at 6,000 and then change another cam and have it make peak power at 7,500. You're not going to do that with just a cam. That's way too much of a change in RPM. You have to change a lot of other things to make that work. Got the Fox body up and running, but I'm in pain. I can't enjoy it. That's not good. Yep. So somebody get a Predator carburetor. So California, what do I already know? Because I'm doubting that I do. Richard, how about an 18-degree AFR versus 20-degree Dart head for a big block Chevy? I think that the one that you want to look at is the Brodex head for those. My concern with carbs is driving through Colorado, running painfully rich as a result. See, I haven't seen that with carburetors. Oh, the difference in throttle placement. Yeah, the gain isn't from throttle placement. Not on the high ram. Not on a port injected high ram. Richard, what if you advance the timing? I don't know if the timing is going to dramatically change if you have an overabundance of fuel. I don't know how much the timing is going to change that. But I just haven't seen that. Because I've driven carbureted cars. My side draft Z was a perfect example. I drove it from near sea level up to Tahoe, which was 6,000 or 7,000 feet, and it ran fine. I never changed any jetting or anything on it. I always thought the X was silent. The big Brodies, that's a that's when you do burnouts, but Brodies are it's a like pet name for Brodex, I think. +4 advanced cams rock on big block Chevy boats. So that's just a universal thing that just every cam, no matter what cam timing it already has, if you advance it 4 degrees, then it works on big block Chevy boats. Probably the translation is that you've tried that on some boat and it worked, right? I'm guessing. Richard, have you done any Gen 5 strokers? I have not. I haven't tested. Only the L83 is the only. The L83 is the only one I've run on the engine dyno here at West Tech. Someone has a 10-foot tall runner on an intake. 10 feet's pretty big. Predator, you're going to look for one of those at the Good Guys swap meet. Guys probably want an arm and a leg for him now, right? Chad, you ready for Florida? For snaking? Catching some pythons? Trying to talk my buddy Jimmy and Chad into going down into the swamps with me. Have you seen an electric supercharger worth testing? I just don't know how you can get the electric motor to spin a supercharger that could support any reasonable amount of airflow. Do you ever put big block Chevy rockers on a small block Chevy for more ratio? Will that even work? We have interchanged big block and Ford rockers, like Cleveland rockers. And I've done rocker tests both on big block Chevys and on small block Chevys, but I never ever remember taking big block rockers and putting them on small blocks. Yeah, if you think about an electric supercharger, let's say that it took 100 horsepower worth of draw to spin a supercharger to provide the amount of airflow and against the amount of pressure that it's going to require. Even 100 horsepower electric motor is pretty big. I haven't seen that. If it's 10 feet high, that would be a lot. I think I would rather go up and wrap it back down. Yeah, carbureted big block works good. Tesla has different motor configurations and traditionals. Yeah, they have really high voltage. It's very, very high voltage, and the power supply is very, very impressive. We're going to be stopping a little early, so get your questions in. How's our poll doing? Would you run EFI on your street trip big block? 74% saying yes. I wonder if Chad answered that. Can Gen 5 LT engines run on a constant fuel pressure, 58 psi? You can't run 58 psi on the direct injection. The direct injection pressure is much higher than that, but the motor probably would run as a port injected motor on 58 psi. When are you going to finish the 396? As soon as I get the, I don't think the heads are back at West Tech yet. They're fixed, but they're not back. Chad, that's awesome. I support inclusion and acceptance. Chad's telling you in engineering guys that he goes both ways, fuel injection and carburation. The CSU blow through carburetor. Like I said, we've run that a lot. It's worked well on the dyno. I just don't know about, and I'm sure Kevin's going to give me a hard time. I just don't know about having it drive around and stuff. Maybe you guys have experience with that. I'm looking forward to getting the Omni. I'm going to go back and see the guys from the car farm, and we'll go to the SDAC deal. And then I'm looking forward to getting it back so that I can do things like Rocky Mountain and Power Tour or whatever. Steve Morse did a TorqueStorm twin test a few months ago to see how much horsepower was used to turn them both. At 6,000 RPM, it took 600 horsepower. That's not accurate. $300 horsepower to drive a supercharger. I don't think that supercharger can supply enough airflow to require that kind of draw unless they overspun it and put it into surge or something. I don't think it will support that much. I don't think that supercharger is capable of that. 300 horsepower draw is what to give you an idea, is what a TVS blower, a 2650 requires at 20 plus thousand RPM and 20 plus pounds of boost at a flow rate that would support 1,000 horsepower. So it's a lot, and a single TorqueStorm won't supply that amount. So I don't know how he tested it. This testing was actually done on a supercharger dyno, so we know that it works. Just hooking the blowers up and letting them free spin or whatever on an engine does not tell you what's going on. Was a 191 small block Chevy head? Should that say is a 191 small block Chevy head a good piece? Buick heads are aluminum. They're bare from TA. They know what they're doing. Home ported from an old drag Buick guy. Good. No brakes. It actually takes probably more than 600 horsepower now to spin a top fuel blower. I've heard talk that it's up around 1,000. I've heard that crank-driven centrifugals are going quicker in the 8th than turbos right now. Is there any truth to that? I don't run into those circles. TorqueStorm engineers were present to witness it. I don't believe that supercharger would ever be in a position to require 300 horsepower from one of those superchargers. I don't think it supports that much airflow. I just don't think that works. And I don't know that it would get so bad that it would require that would have that kind of parasitic loss, especially at just 6,000 RPM. I don't know what kind of pulley ratio they had on there, but I would trust a blower dyno test where it's regulated. Buddy of mine is having fuel starvation problems at 20 pounds of boost on a 496. Is it a blow through carbureted deal? Is it EFI? Is it E85? There's lots of questions. Steve Morse is a sharp guy. He definitely knows how to make power. They use huge amounts of horsepower. They use less horsepower to run a centrifugal supercharger than it does to run a roots blower. Try a Mad Max supercharger with a clutch on it. You have to have somebody good make a clutch for that. Kevin's in the house. Oh, see, I told you he was going to yell at me. I need to go for a ride in your streetcar. So I told you guys, Kevin's telling you can have drivability and power with a blow-through carburetor. Blow-through twin turbo jet boat. I've seen that stuff. Who is it? Oh, Mike Miller has some stuff that he's done for boats using Kevin's carburetor, I'm sure, because I think he has. Because Kevin, I think didn't you do a Dominator carburetor for Mike Miller for one of his deals that he had a Vortec on? It's making a lot of power. And never be skeptical about drivability again. I'd like to see it. I don't ever get a chance to run drivability stuff on the dyno. You know, we can make it idle and we can make it transition and we can make it have a wide open throttle, but I don't ever know how that translates to taking it out and running around. So my comment on your Supercharger video today is exactly why I said if only screw type compressors were more efficient. I don't know what you mean. And my question is still the same as it was because I answered your question. More efficient than what? What is it you're comparing them to? A twin screw is more efficient than a roots blower. None of the superchargers are, I mean, I don't know how you measure efficiency. None of them are going to make the power the turbo does because we have the parasitic loss associated with driving the superchargers, which we were just having a conversation about. But but in terms of efficiency, a twin screw actually is pretty good. If you read any of or if you read all of the SAE papers are ever written. What I said about centrifugals, I said centrifugals require less power to drive than a roots blower, and I specifically said a 2650. The example that I used was a 2650 Magnuson. That's not a screw blower. That's a positive displacement roots blower. What if screws got bigger as they went along? That would be a neat engineering trick. B&R, the way that the blower dyno works is they have an engine that runs it's not an electric one. They actually use a gas engine. They run the supercharger and they spin the supercharger, and they can regulate the speed of the supercharger. They can regulate the airflow into the supercharger. They can regulate the boost pressure out of it, and then they can just measure the power. It's pretty simple. You have to set everything up, but it's pretty simple once you set it all up, and you can get the actual power consumption of superchargers that way. I think that's a really good way to do it. You see, there are other blower manufacturers who run electric motors. Most of them just run them to spin them and make sure that they're working and making sure that they're processing air and stuff. But if you have like a 30 or 40 or 50 horsepower electric motor, you're not going to be able to test a supercharger that's capable of making 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 or 1,000 horsepower because it's more than 50 horsepower to drive that supercharger. So the guys that have these little setups that spin the blower, that doesn't really give you a good indication. Victor Edelbrock had an eddy current dyno. Have you ever heard of a carburetor? Engineering Explained. I like Engineering Explained. That he does good stuff over there. Yeah, the conclusion's always turbo. Yeah, again, if you go and read SAE, the Society of Automotive Engineers, if you read SAE papers on efficiency of blower designs, they're going to keep coming back to twin screws, that they work fairly well. Yeah, there are lots of there are lots of eddy current dynos. My Hellcat shot above 100 miles per gallon when going downhill. Yeah, it just pegs that needle. What's the ideal compression for big block marine boost on pump gas? There isn't one. Are there overheating issues under high load for extended amounts of time? It would depend on the temperature of the air going in, and then whether you had an intercooler. A twin screw is going to have a lower charge temperature at any given boost level than a Roots will. So even though it has internal compression, which is why it's more efficient, a lot of guys, mostly guys that have Roots blowers that want to say that they're good, they use that as somehow a negative. That's like saying this is more efficient, but yeah, that's a bad thing. No, it's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. And again, I have no skin in the game. I don't care about. I don't have a Roots manufacturing company. I don't have a twin screw or a centrifugal or a, you know, I'm not in the blower game. I'm just telling you, this is all the information that I've over lots of years read. And this is what happens when you run them. So if you run back-to-back runs, is there loss of power from a positive displacement supercharger? Are you talking, is your question about heat soak or something? So a video of Steve Morse running a 9.3 liter twin screw. that's a pretty big blower. I do not work at Westech. $2,400 horsepower from a Porsche 928 engine? That seems like a lot. That seems like a ton. Let's see. Would you run EFI in your street strip big block Chevy? 74% saying yes. That's actually a good number. I'm gonna have to go. I'm gonna have to go check out that 928. That sounds pretty cool. Yeah, Chad, did you ever make the changes to the 400? Did you ever change that ridiculously small inlet size line going into the fuel pump? That motor actually has lots of potential, and that's an awesome car. The wagon is. But on that note, it is time to go, though. Thank you all for showing up, Chad. Thanks for checking in. Everybody, say hi and bye to Chad. Thank you guys. Cheers for just water for tonight. Before I go, though, let me know. Do any of you guys out there have any Hot Wheels? Don't steal them from your kids, because I don't want to take any kids' Hot Wheels. But let me know if anybody has any Hot Wheels, because I'm doing something with them, and I'd like to get some. So let me know if you guys have any. Otherwise, if otherwise I'll just buy a whole bunch. RC cars. Kevin, I'm going to take you up on going for a ride in your car sometime. I'll have to when I'm down there. That'll be cool. That way I can get on and talk intelligently about how cool carburetors are. But on that note, it is time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up. I'll be back tomorrow. But if you haven't, please go look at the video that I just put up. I just put up a video on the twin screw Vortex supercharger on the LS, as I promised the other night when we were doing it. Next chat is tomorrow night.